Picture a guy in his mid-60s sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. The dishes are done. The TV is on low in the other room. He is holding his Social Security statement. That pale green paper. He is looking at two numbers. What he gets at 62. What he gets at 70. And he is doing the math in his head the way everyone does. If I live to 78, I break even. But what if I do not make it that far? I know that feeling. I have stared at those numbers too, watching the coffee go cold. Trying to do retirement math on a Tuesday night like the answer is just one calculation away. You are not alone in this. On one side, you have the experts, the YouTube videos, the financial podcasts, all saying the same thing. Wait until 70. Maximize your benefit. Let it compound. On the other side, you turn on the news and some anchor is telling you Social Security's trust fund runs dry by 2035. Less than 10 years. So which is it? Wait until 70 for a system that might not pay you anything? Or take the money now before it disappears? That is where people get pulled off course. It is built on two pieces of advice that are both technically true and wildly misleading when you mix them together. The break-even chart your financial advisor loves. It only works if you are the only person in the equation. And the 2035 collapse. It does not mean what the headlines say it means. So let us separate those two. I will show you what the break-even analysis is actually measuring and who it was designed for. Then we will look at the 2035 trust fund situation with clear eyes, not panic. And most importantly, I will show you how to protect your strategy against the real risk without making a permanent, irreversible decision out of fear. Before we go any further, how many of you are planning to claim at 62 specifically because you are afraid the fund is going to run out? Drop afraid in the comments. I want to know how many of us are in this together. So let's talk about the break-even chart. You've seen it. Maybe you've even built one in a spreadsheet. The logic sounds clean. If you claim at 62, you get a smaller check, but you start collecting sooner. If you wait until 70, you get a bigger check, but you've left years of payments on the table. Somewhere around age 78, the math evens out. Live past 78, delaying wins. D before 78, claiming early wins. That's it. That's the whole chart. And here's what it's missing: a second person. The break-even analysis is built around one life, one benefit, one death date. But for married couples, this is a household decision whether people realize it or not. And there's a rule buried in there that changes everything for married couples. It's called the survivor benefit. When one spouse dies, the surviving spouse doesn't keep two checks. They keep one. The higher one. The lower benefit disappears permanently. Here is what that looks like in a real couple. John and Mary are both 62. John earned more over his career. He's the higher earner in the household. He figures he won't live past 78, so he runs the break-even math and decides to claim early. His benefit at 62 comes out to $2,000 a month. John turns out to be right. He dies at 78. The math worked out exactly as he planned. But Mary lives to 89. For the last 11 years of her life, she's collecting based on what John locked in at 62. Had John waited until 70, his benefit would have been $3,600 a month. That $1,600 difference every single month for 11 years. That's $192,000 that isn't there. The math was not wrong. It was solving the wrong problem. This is what I've watched happen in real households. Not dramatic, not a crisis at 62. Just a slow, grinding shortfall at 83 when options are gone and energy is low and the math has already been decided. What people usually do not see at 62 is where the cost lands later. John felt fine at 62. The consequences landed on Mary at 80, when she couldn't go back and change it. Delaying Social Security when you're the higher earner in a couple isn't really an optimization strategy. It's closer to protection for the spouse who may be left with one check. You're not just buying yourself a bigger check. You're buying your spouse a floor they can actually live on if you go first. So if you're married and you're the higher earner, the break-even chart isn't your document. It's incomplete. It was built for a world where only one person exists. That's the trap most people fall into. Not because they're careless, but because the advice they received was designed for a different situation than the one they're actually in. Now, if that's the first reason to think carefully about delay, the survivor protection angle, there's a second reason that most people don't see coming until they're 73, and it's too late to move the pieces. And it has nothing to do with your spouse. It has to do with a tax bill that's been quietly growing in the background for the last decade. And in 2026, the rules just changed. I need to own something here. 5 years ago, I would have told you that taxes in retirement are almost always lower than taxes during your working years. Lower income, lower bracket. That seemed like basic math. I've had to revise that, because 2026 changed the rules in a way that makes the old assumption genuinely dangerous for a specific group of people. I was wrong to underestimate this, and if you've been planning around the old numbers, you may be too. Here's what happened. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017 and temporarily lowered tax brackets across the board. That law expired at the end of 2025. As of right now, in 2026, the brackets have moved back up. The 12% bracket is back to 15%. The 22% bracket is back to 25%. Some households are looking at 28% where they used to see 22%. That alone is worth paying attention to. But the real pressure isn't just the bracket reset. It's what happens when you combine that reset with something called RMDs. Required minimum distributions. At age 73, the IRS requires you to start pulling money out of your traditional 401,000 and IRA accounts, whether you need the income or not. The government wants its share of the pre-tax money you've been deferring for decades. And the amount you have to pull out is based on your account balance, which, if you've been a disciplined saver, has been compounding quietly for 30 plus years. That is the part a lot of people do not feel coming in their early 60s. Here is where this starts to hit real households. Think about David. He's 60, single, and he has $1,500,000 in a traditional 401,000. He's proud of that number. He worked hard for it. At 62, he decides to claim Social Security early, partly to protect that 401,000 by not touching it. Let it keep growing, he figures. Use the Social Security check for living expenses. Logical, reasonable, and quietly expensive. Fast forward to 73. The IRS shows up on a $1,500,000 account that's been growing for over a decade. David's required minimum distribution is somewhere around $65,000 to $75,000 just in year one, and it increases each year after that. Add his Social Security check on top of that. In 2026, with the higher brackets back in effect, David is looking at a combined income that pushes him straight into the 28% bracket. He's paying taxes on money he did not even choose to take out. That sounds cautious. It also sets up the problem. The thing is, between age 62 and 73, David had an 11-year window. His earned income was low or zero. His Social Security was not activated yet. His bracket was sitting almost empty. That is the stretch where your tax bracket may be unusually empty. Most people drive right past it without stopping. If David had used those years to do Roth conversions, pulling money from the 401,000, paying taxes at 12% or 15%, and moving it into a Roth account, he would have been drawing down the balance that generates RMDs. Smaller 401,000 at 73 means smaller mandatory distributions. Smaller mandatory distributions means staying in a manageable bracket. Instead, he claimed Social Security early, left the 401,000 untouched, and watched it grow into a tax problem. The math is fairly direct here. Say David converts $50,000 a year during that 11-year window at a 15% rate. That is $7,500 in taxes per year, versus paying 28% on forced distributions later. On the same $50,000, that is the difference between $7,500 and $14,000 every year. For potentially 15 to 20 years. That is not spreadsheet trivia. That is real after-tax income you never get back. That is the cost of claiming early when you have significant pre-tax savings. Not just the Social Security reduction. The tax drag on everything else that follows. Now, you've heard the survivor benefit argument. You've heard the RMD tax argument. Both point toward delay, but I can already hear what you're thinking. Okay, the math makes sense. But what about 2035? What happens if I wait until 70 and the whole fund collapses before I collect a single extra dollar? That's next. Let's look at what 2035 actually means. The Social Security Trust Fund is a reserve, a buffer built up over decades when payroll tax collections exceeded what was being paid out. That buffer is projected to run out around 2035. When the headlines say Social Security goes bankrupt in 2035, that is the number they are pointing at. But here is what depletion actually means in plain terms. Social Security does not just run on trust fund reserves. It runs on incoming payroll taxes, the money being withheld from paychecks right now from the workforce that is currently employed. That revenue does not stop in 2035. It keeps flowing in. The trust fund depletion just means the reserve cushion is gone and the program has to run on current income only. According to the Social Security trustees' own projections, current payroll tax revenue covers roughly 79% to 83% of scheduled benefits after the trust fund is depleted. So the risk is a reduction, not a disappearance. That is the actual risk on the table. I do not have a crystal ball, and I will be direct. I do not have full confidence that Washington moves quickly on this. They have known about this timeline for years, and the urgency has not exactly been overwhelming. It is possible some level of reduction happens. I am not dismissing that. But here is the math that matters. If you claim Social Security at 62 instead of waiting until 70, you permanently lock in a benefit that is roughly 30% lower than your full delayed amount. That is not a projection. That is not a political risk. That happens the moment you file, guaranteed for the rest of your life. So the fear-based logic goes like this. Claim early at 62 to avoid a possible 20% cut in 2035. And the actual result of that logic. You voluntarily accept a certain 30% reduction today to protect yourself from a possible 20% reduction later. What often happens is people overreact to the possible cut and lock in the bigger reduction themselves. Run it side by side. Say your full benefit at 70 would be $3,000 a month. Claim at 62, and that drops to around $2,100, a 30% reduction locked in permanently. Now apply the worst-case 2035 scenario to both. If benefits get cut 20%, the delayed $3,000 becomes $2,400. The early $2,100 becomes $1,680. Even in that scenario, waiting still comes out ahead by $720 a month, every month, for the rest of your life. The fear can push people toward filing early and locking in the smaller check themselves. I've watched this happen. Someone hears 2035 and makes a permanent filing decision within the week, not because the math worked out, but because the anxiety got unbearable. And once you file, you generally cannot undo it. That decision follows you for 20, 25 years. Headlines are built for urgency. Retirement decisions are not. Acting on that fear does not put you on a safer path. It reduces your guaranteed income floor permanently, based on a risk that may end up smaller than the decision you made to avoid it. Delaying builds from a higher base. Even if a reduction comes, you are absorbing it from a larger starting point. Your floor is still higher than what the early filer locked in on day one. Now, I want to be clear about something before we go further. Everything I have said in the last 3 sections, the survivor benefit, the RMD tax window, the 235 math, all of it assumes a certain profile. Married or higher earner, or significant pre-tax savings. But if you have been watching this and thinking I am not married, and I do not have $800,000 in a $401,000, then the calculus shifts meaningfully. The rules that make delay so powerful for one group do not apply the same way to another. That is what we are covering next. And honestly, it might be the most liberating 5 minutes of this whole video. Here's something the financial content world doesn't say loudly enough. The rules we've been talking about, the survivor benefit math, the ARM-MD tax issue, the delay until 70 strategy, those were built around a specific person. Married, higher earner, significant pre-tax savings, probably north of $500,000 in a traditional $401,000 or IRA. If that's not you, the framework changes, not slightly. Fundamentally, think about Susan. She's 62, never married, has $300,000 in a traditional IRA. She's been watching financial videos for the last year, and every single one tells her the same thing. Claiming at 62 is the worst financial mistake you can make. She's started to feel almost embarrassed about wanting to do it. Like she's being reckless. Like she missed something obvious that everyone else figured out. She didn't miss anything. The advice just wasn't built around her situation. Here's what Susan's situation actually looks like. There's no spouse to protect. The survivor benefit argument. The entire reason delay functions as protection for a surviving spouse doesn't apply. There's no one whose retirement income depends on the floor she sets today. And on the tax side, $300,000 in pre-tax savings at 73. Even after a decade of growth, generates an ARM-MD somewhere in the range of $15,000 to $20,000 a year. That is real, but it is not the same kind of tax pressure as the $1,500,000 case. Combined with Social Security, Susan's total income in her 70s is very likely to stay within a manageable range, even with the 2026 bracket reset factored in. The pressure that shows up for someone like David does not but show up the same way here. So what does that mean practically? It means the break-even chart, the one we said was incomplete for couples, starts working again for Susan. If she claims at 62 and lives into her mid-70s or beyond, she collects years of income she would have otherwise left on the table. If her health is uncertain, early claiming can make more sense. If she is healthy and active right now, in her early 60s, what planners sometimes call the go-go years, that is the window she has to actually use the money. Knees work. Energy is there. The list of places she wants to see is still long. Taking Social Security at 62 and using that money on experiences, on travel, on the life she has been deferring, that is not a mistake. For Susan, in her specific situation, that can be the right strategy. It fits her actual life, not a household that does not exist. Yes, her monthly check will be smaller at 80 than it would have been if she had waited. She will be working with a tighter healthcare budget in her later years. That is the real trade-off, and it is worth naming clearly. But it is a trade-off she is making with open eyes, spending her best years more fully and accepting a leaner floor later. That is a legitimate choice. Personal finance is personal. That phrase gets thrown around so much it starts to sound empty, but it means something real here. The advice that protects a high-earning married couple from a tax problem at 73 is not the same advice that serves a single woman with $300,000 who wants to see Portugal while travel still feels easy. Don't let someone else's optimal strategy make you feel guilty about yours. Which group are you in? Married couple running the tax and survivor math, or single with the freedom to optimize for your own life? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious how this is landing across both groups. So here's where we've landed. If you're married and you're the higher earner, that is the profile where delay usually deserves the strongest look. Use the low-income window between retirement and 70 to draw down the $401,000, run Roth conversions at the lower brackets, and let Social Security grow into the largest survivor floor it can be. The person you're protecting might not be you. It might be the person who outlives you by 11 years. If you're single and your pre-tax savings are under $500,000, the math opens up. The survivor argument doesn't apply. The RMD tax pressure is manageable. Your break-even chart is actually yours to use. Claiming early to fund the years when you're healthy, mobile, and genuinely able to enjoy it, that is not a mistake. That is a strategy built around your real life. And for everyone, do not let 2035 panic make this decision for you. Claiming at 62 to avoid a possible 20% future cut means accepting a guaranteed 30% permanent reduction right now. The fear is understandable, but it can push people toward the weaker decision. A lot of this comes down to making the decision with a clear head, not under headline pressure. Knowing which rules apply to you and which ones do not is what helps a retirement plan hold up over time. The savings matter. Matching the strategy to your life matters too. If this helped you think through where you stand, subscribe and hit the bell. I will keep covering the practical side of retirement planning as the rules evolve, especially with the 2026 tax changes still settling in. And if you have a spouse or a friend sitting on this same decision, send this video their way. The conversation is worth having before the filing window closes.